Megan scrolled through her phone as she walked down the busy London street. Her TikTok account had just hit 2 million followers, and she was hungry for more content that would go viral. The 23-year-old influencer had built her following by doing outrageous pranks and challenges in public places. Her latest video of dancing in a library had gotten 5 million views in just 2 days. "I need something bigger," she muttered to herself, watching other creators' videos. They were all doing the same boring stuff, dancing in malls, pranking friends, or doing makeup tutorials. Megan wanted something that would make her stand out from the crowd. As she turned the corner, the famous red walls of Buckingham Palace came into view. Tourists were everywhere, taking photos and admiring the grand building. But what caught Megan's attention were the 2 royal guards standing perfectly still at their posts. They wore their traditional red uniforms and tall black hats, holding their rifles in the exact same position they had probably held for hours. A wicked smile spread across Megan's face. She had found her next viral moment. She had heard stories about these guards, how they never moved, never smiled, never broke character no matter what happened around them. Some people said they weren't even allowed to speak while on duty. This was perfect. She could create content that would definitely get millions of views and make her famous beyond TikTok. Megan quickly opened her camera app and started filming herself. "Hey, beautiful people. Your girl Megan is here at Buckingham Palace, and I'm about to do something that's never been done before. These guards think they're so tough and serious, but let's see if I can break them." She flipped the camera to show the guards in the background, then back to herself. "I'm going to try everything to make these guys crack. This is going to be epic." Other tourists started noticing her talking loudly to her phone. Some moved closer, curious about what this young woman was planning to do. A few recognized her from TikTok and began whispering excitedly to their friends. Megan felt the familiar rush of adrenaline she got before creating controversial content. She had built her brand on pushing boundaries and doing things that made people uncomfortable. Her followers loved watching her get reactions from unsuspecting people in public. She approached the first guard slowly, making sure her phone captured every moment. The guard was a tall man, probably in his 30s, with a stern face and piercing blue eyes that stared straight ahead. He didn't even glance at her as she got closer. Perfect, Megan thought. This is going to be so easy. She had no idea that this particular guard, Sergeant James Morrison, had been dealing with attention-seeking tourists and content creators for over 8 years. He had seen every trick, every attempt to make him break protocol, and every disrespectful act imaginable. What Megan didn't know was that James had been specially trained to handle situations exactly like this. The crowd of tourists began to grow as more people realized something entertaining was about to happen. Some pulled out their own phones, ready to record whatever was coming next. The atmosphere became charged with anticipation. Megan positioned herself right in front of the guard, her phone held high to capture both of them in the frame. She was so focused on getting the perfect angle that she missed the subtle change in the guard's expression, a tiny tightening around his eyes that suggested he knew exactly what was coming. "This is it," Megan whispered to her camera. "Time to make this guard famous for all the wrong reasons." Megan started her performance with what she thought were harmless jokes. She stood right in front of Sergeant Morrison and began making funny faces at her camera, occasionally pointing at him and laughing. The growing crowd of tourists seemed amused, and several people were recording with their own phones. "Look at this guy," Megan said loudly to her camera. "He's like a statue. I bet he hasn't blinked in hours." She moved closer to the guard, waving her hand near his face. "Hello, anyone home?" James Morrison remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. Years of training had taught him to ignore distractions, no matter how annoying they became. He had dealt with drunk tourists, screaming children, and even people who had tried to climb on him. This young woman was nothing new, but Megan was just getting started. She began dancing around the guard, doing the latest TikTok trends right in front of him. The crowd grew larger, with more people pulling out their phones. Some tourists looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but others were clearly entertained. "Come on," Megan shouted. "Just smile, just once. My followers want to see you crack." She did a cartwheel, nearly bumping into the guard's rifle. A few people in the crowd gasped, but James didn't move a muscle. Frustrated by his lack of response, Megan decided to escalate her tactics. She started telling jokes directly to the guard, each one louder and more obnoxious than the last. When that failed, she began singing pop songs off-key while dancing provocatively just inches from his face. "This is insane," she said to her camera. "This guy's like a robot. But don't worry, beautiful people, I have more tricks up my sleeve." What Megan didn't realize was that her behavior was being carefully observed by more than just tourists. Palace security had been monitoring the situation from the moment she started filming. They had protocols for dealing with people who harassed the guards, and Megan was quickly approaching the line that would trigger their intervention. She pulled out a small mirror from her purse and began flashing sunlight into the guard's eyes. "Wake up," she chanted. Several tourists looked shocked by this behavior, and a few started walking away, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. James felt the bright light hitting his eyes but maintained his position. Inside, he was noting every detail of this woman's behavior. Her tactics weren't original. He had seen similar attempts dozens of times. But something about her attitude suggested she wasn't going to stop anytime soon. Megan grew more desperate as her attempts failed. She started making loud noises, clapping her hands near the guard's ears, and even tried to tickle him with a feather she found in her bag. The crowd was getting restless, with some people clearly disapproving of her actions. "This is ridiculous," Megan announced to her camera. "I've been trying for 20 minutes and this guy won't even look at me. But I'm not giving up. If you want to see me break a royal guard, smash that follow button and stay tuned." An elderly British woman in the crowd shook her head disapprovingly. "That's disrespectful, that is," she muttered to her husband. "These young people have no manners." But Megan was beyond caring about the opinions of strangers. Her follower count was her only concern, and she knew that controversy created engagement. The more outrageous her behavior, the more views she would get. She decided to try physical contact next, something that would definitely cross a line. But as she reached out her hand toward the guard's uniform, something unexpected happened. James Morrison's eyes shifted slightly, making direct contact with hers for just a split second. In that brief moment, Megan saw something that made her pause. It wasn't anger or annoyance in his eyes. It was something else entirely. A calm, measured intelligence that suggested he was far from being the mindless statue she had assumed him to be. But Megan was too caught up in her quest for viral fame to truly process what she had seen. She shook off the strange feeling and prepared for her next, more aggressive attempt to break the guard's composure. Emboldened by what she thought was progress, Megan decided to push even further. She had noticed a few other content creators in the crowd, and she couldn't let them steal her thunder. This was her moment, and she was determined to create the most viral Royal Guard video ever made. "All right, beautiful people," she said to her camera. "Time to take this to the next level. I'm going to do something that no other TikToker has ever dared to try." She approached the guard again, this time with more confidence. The crowd had grown to about 50 people, all watching intently. Some were recording with their phones, while others looked concerned about what might happen next. Megan started by pretending to interview the guard like a news reporter. She held her phone up like a microphone and spoke in an exaggerated professional voice. "Sir, how does it feel to be the most boring person in London? Do you ever get tired of standing there like a mannequin?" When that got no response, she tried a different approach. She began acting out scenes from popular movies, using the guard as an unwilling co-star. She pretended to be in a romantic scene, talking to him as if he were her lover. Several tourists looked embarrassed by her performance. "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" she quoted dramatically, pressing her hand to her forehead and gazing up at the guard's face. "Speak to me, my darling. Just one word." James Morrison had heard every Shakespeare quote imaginable during his years of service. He had also been propositioned, insulted, and subjected to every form of amateur entertainment tourists could think of. This young woman's performance was particularly cringeworthy, but he had endured much worse. Megan's frustration was beginning to show. Her usual tactics weren't working, and she could sense that some of the crowd was losing interest. A few people had already walked away and others were checking their watches. She needed to do something more dramatic. She decided to try appealing to the guard's emotions. "Please," she said, dropping her theatrical voice and speaking more naturally. "I'm just trying to make people smile. My followers love this stuff. Can't you just give me a little reaction? Even a tiny smile?" For a moment it seemed like she might be showing some humanity, but then she immediately returned to filming herself. "See how nice I'm being?" she told her camera. "But this guy is so cold and heartless he won't even acknowledge a polite request." The manipulation was obvious to anyone watching, but Megan seemed genuinely convinced that she was the victim in this situation. She had spent so much time creating content that she had lost sight of how her actions affected real people. A security officer had been watching from a distance and was now approaching the scene. He had been instructed to intervene if the harassment became too disruptive, and Megan's behavior was clearly bothering other visitors to the palace. But before the officer could reach them, Megan made her biggest mistake yet. She decided to try one final desperate tactic that would cross every line of respect and decency. She started making jokes about the guard's family, his intelligence, and his appearance. Her comments became increasingly cruel and personal, even though she knew nothing about the man she was targeting. She was so focused on getting a reaction that she forgot these were real human beings with feelings and dignity. "I bet you're so boring that your own family falls asleep when you talk," she said loudly, making sure her camera captured every word. "Do you even have friends? Or do they all run away because you're such a weirdo?" The crowd began to turn against her. What had started as mild entertainment was now becoming uncomfortable to watch. Several people made disgusted faces and a few started speaking up. "That's enough, love," called out an older man with a thick British accent. Show some respect, but Megan was beyond listening to reason. She was caught up in the moment, convinced that she was on the verge of creating the perfect viral video. She didn't notice the security officer getting closer, or the way the crowd's mood had shifted against her. Most importantly, she didn't notice the subtle change in Sergeant Morrison's posture. After 30 minutes of harassment, something inside him had finally decided that this young woman needed to learn a lesson about respect and consequences. Megan had just finished making another cruel joke about the guard's appearance when something completely unexpected happened. Without breaking his formal posture or moving his body even slightly, Sergeant James Morrison began to speak. His voice was clear, authoritative, and carried the distinct tone of someone with years of military training. But more shocking than the fact that he spoke was what he actually said. "Miss," he began, his eyes still fixed straight ahead. "I've been watching your performance for the past 35 minutes, and I have to say it's been quite educational." Megan's jaw dropped. Her phone nearly slipped from her hand as she stared at the guard in complete shock. The crowd fell silent, all eyes focused on this unexpected turn of events. "Educational?" Megan stammered, trying to recover her composure. "What do you mean?" James continued speaking in the same calm, professional tone, never once looking directly at her or changing his rigid stance. "You see, I've been serving as a royal guard for 8 years, 3 months, and 16 days. In that time, I've encountered approximately 2,437 people who thought they could break my professional composure through various forms of harassment." The crowd was mesmerized. No one had ever heard a royal guard speak while on duty, let alone deliver what sounded like it might become a speech. "You, however," James continued, "have provided me with a masterclass in everything that's wrong with modern social media culture. In just over half an hour, you've demonstrated narcissism, disrespect, harassment, and a complete lack of empathy for others." Megan's face began to turn red. This wasn't going according to her plan at all. She had expected either silence or anger, not this calm, intelligent analysis of her behavior. "But what's most interesting," the guard went on, "is that you seem genuinely surprised that a human being in uniform might actually be a human being with thoughts, feelings, and intelligence. Did you assume that this red coat somehow erased my ability to observe, think, and form opinions about what I was witnessing?" Several people in the crowd began to nod in agreement. A few even started clapping softly. Megan tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, I was just having fun. It's just content. You don't have to be so serious about everything." "Ah, yes," James replied, still maintaining his perfect posture. "The it's just content defense. Let me ask you something, miss. If someone followed you to your workplace and spent 40 minutes trying to humiliate you while filming it for millions of strangers to laugh at, would you consider that just fun?" The question hung in the air. Megan opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. She had never thought about it from that perspective. James wasn't finished. "You see, I have a master's degree in history from Oxford University. I speak 4 languages fluently. I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan, where I helped protect civilians and rebuild schools. I volunteer at a children's hospital on weekends, and I've been married to my wonderful wife Sarah for 6 years." The crowd was completely captivated. This wasn't just a guard anymore. He was a real person with a real life, and his words were having a powerful impact on everyone listening. But according to your video, he continued, I'm just a boring statue that exists for your entertainment. You've reduced 8 years of dedicated service to your country into a prop for your social media performance. Megan's phone was still recording, but she wasn't sure if this was helping or destroying her content. The comments that were starting to appear on her live stream were not what she expected to see. This guard is amazing, wrote one viewer. Finally, someone putting influencers in their place, wrote another. The security officer who had been approaching stopped where he was. He could see that Sergeant Morrison had the situation completely under control in a way that was both professional and educational. James Morrison wasn't done with his lesson. He had years of frustration built up from dealing with people who treated him like a tourist attraction instead of a human being, and this moment had given him the perfect opportunity to address it. Now, I want you to imagine something, he continued, his voice remaining perfectly calm and measured. Imagine if I showed up at your home, started filming you without permission, made jokes about your appearance, tried to distract you from your work, and then posted it online for millions of people to mock. How would that make you feel? Megan shifted uncomfortably. The crowd was now clearly on the guard's side, and she could feel their disapproval directed at her. Her phone was still recording, but the comments on her live stream were becoming increasingly critical of her behavior. I never thought about it like that, she admitted quietly. Of course you didn't, James replied, because in your world other people exist only as content for your videos. You see a uniform and assume there's no person inside it. You see someone doing their job with dignity and professionalism, and you think it's your right to try to humiliate them for entertainment. A woman in the crowd called out, "Tell her!" And several others murmured their agreement. James continued his masterful response. But here's what I find most fascinating about your approach. You spent 40 minutes trying to prove that I lack self-control, discipline, and professionalism. Yet every second of those 40 minutes I was demonstrating exactly those qualities, while you were demonstrating the complete opposite. Megan's face was now bright red with embarrassment. She had never been called out so thoroughly and intelligently. Usually when people criticized her content, she could dismiss them as haters or jealous people. But this man's words were measured, thoughtful, and impossible to argue against. You know what real strength looks like? James asked. It's not getting a reaction from someone who's trained not to react. Real strength is having the self-discipline to do your job with pride, even when people are actively trying to make you fail at it. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause. Several people were now openly glaring at Megan, making it clear that they had completely lost sympathy for her. Furthermore, the guard continued, you've spent this entire time talking about your followers and your content, but you haven't once considered the impact of your actions on the other tourists here who came to enjoy a peaceful visit to one of Britain's most important historical sites. Megan looked around and noticed for the first time how her behavior had affected others. Families with children had moved away from the area. Elderly visitors looked annoyed and disappointed. Other tourists seemed embarrassed to be associated with her actions, even as bystanders. I serve the crown and the people of Britain, James said. That includes providing these visitors with a dignified, respectful experience when they come to see this palace. Your behavior has disrupted that experience for dozens of people who did nothing to deserve that treatment. One tourist, a middle-aged woman with a Scottish accent, spoke up from the crowd. He's absolutely right. We came here with our grandchildren and we had to leave because of all this nonsense. Megan realized that her quest for viral content had affected far more people than she had ever considered. She had been so focused on her phone screen and her follower count that she had completely ignored the real world around her. Now, James said, his tone becoming slightly gentler, I'm going to give you a choice. You can continue this performance and wait for security to escort you away from the premises, which will certainly give you the viral moment you're looking for, but for all the wrong reasons. The security officer, who had been waiting respectfully at a distance, took a step forward to make his presence known. Or, James continued, you can take a moment to consider what you've learned today, apologize to the people whose experience you've disrupted, and perhaps create content that builds people up instead of trying to tear them down. The entire crowd waited in silence for Megan's response. Megan stood there for what felt like an eternity, her phone still in her hand but no longer pointed at the guard. The weight of James Morrison's words had hit her harder than any criticism she had ever received. For the first time in years, she was seeing her actions through someone else's eyes, and she didn't like what she saw. The crowd waited in complete silence. Even the usual sounds of London traffic seemed muted as everyone focused on what would happen next. Megan's live stream was still running, and thousands of viewers were watching this moment unfold in real time. Slowly, Megan lowered her phone and looked directly at Sergeant Morrison. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and genuine, completely different from the loud, performative tone she had been using all day. "You're right," she said simply. "I'm sorry." She turned to face the crowd of tourists, many of whom had been watching her behavior with disapproval for the past hour. "I'm sorry to all of you too. I got so caught up in trying to create content that I forgot you were real people just trying to enjoy your day." An elderly gentleman nodded approvingly, and the Scottish woman who had spoken earlier gave her a small, forgiving smile. Megan turned back to the guard, who was still maintaining his professional posture, but had somehow seemed more human since he had spoken. "Thank you for teaching me something important today. I promise I'll think differently about my content from now on." James Morrison didn't respond verbally. He had already said everything he needed to say. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he appreciated her apology and hoped she would follow through on her promise. Megan looked down at her phone, where hundreds of new comments were still pouring in. But for once, she didn't immediately start reading them to see how many likes and follows she was getting. Instead, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She ended the live stream. Without the pressure of performing for her audience, Megan felt like she could think clearly for the first time in months. She realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped creating content because she enjoyed it, and started doing it only for the validation of strangers on the internet. As the crowd began to disperse, several people approached Megan. Instead of asking for selfies or criticizing her, they offered words of encouragement for her apology and her apparent change of heart. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, dear," said an older woman, "especially in front of all these people." A young father with 2 small children stopped to speak with her. "My kids watch TikTok sometimes. It would be nice if they saw more creators who cared about being kind instead of just being famous." These conversations affected Megan more deeply than any viral video ever had. She realized that real connection with people felt better than digital popularity ever could. 3 days later, Megan posted a new video on her TikTok account. Instead of trying to prank or embarrass someone, she used her platform to talk about respect, empathy, and the importance of remembering that everyone you meet is a real person with their own story. The video went viral, but not in the way her previous content had. Instead of people sharing it to laugh at someone's embarrassment, they shared it because it made them think. Comments poured in from viewers who said her message had inspired them to be more considerate in their own lives. Sergeant James Morrison never saw the video. He didn't use social media. But he didn't need to see it to know that his words had made an impact. That was enough for him. Several months later, Megan's content had completely transformed. She now used her platform to highlight the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things like teachers, healthcare workers, and yes, even military personnel. Her follower count had actually grown, but more importantly, she felt proud of the content she was creating. She never forgot the lesson she learned from a royal guard who taught her that true strength comes not from breaking others down, but from building them up. And whenever she walked past Buckingham Palace, she made sure to nod respectfully at the guards, remembering that behind every uniform was a real person, deserving of dignity and respect.